At this very moment, we are witnessing an event that could fundamentally reshape our familiar world. Saudi Arabia, a long-standing ally of the United States, is now reconsidering its role within the dollar-centered oil economy. Recently, the kingdom announced it would not renew agreements that, for decades, upheld the dollar's status as the world's primary reserve currency. This decision threatens not only America's economic dominance, but also impacts every individual globally. Why might Saudi Arabia's choice in 2025 trigger a seismic shift in the global economy? Have you ever wondered why the dollar became the dominant currency worldwide? It might seem like this has always been the case, but history shows that the title of global reserve currency has shifted multiple times, passing from one powerful nation to another like a relay baton. Before the dollar's rise, other currencies held this prestigious position. Let's look back to the early 18th century when the world's attention was on France and its livre. During that era, the livre was the main currency used in international trade, and France's influence was at its peak, making its money highly valued across continents. But the world is in constant flux. By the 19th century, Britain had surged ahead, transforming into the leading colonial and trading empire. From that moment until the early 20th century, the British pound reigned supreme in global finance. Imagine the pound as the dollar of its time, held in reserves worldwide and used extensively from Europe to Asia. What happened next? After the devastation of the Second World War, the global order shifted once again. The United States strengthened its influence, and the dollar replaced the pound as the world's dominant currency. But what if the dollar were to lose this status, as the livre and the pound once did? In the aftermath of the war, the world sought stability, leading to the Odna Tisicha Divitsot Sorik Chatira Bretton Woods Agreement. This historic meeting established the dollar as the primary currency for international transactions, backed by the U.S. gold reserves. This gave American economies a significant advantage, as global trade was conducted mainly in dollars, prompting nations to hold their reserves in this currency. However, by the early 1970s, the United States faced mounting financial challenges that compelled a reevaluation of dollar's gold backing. Not all countries agreed with this shift. In 1965, France's President Charles de Gaulle openly opposed dollar dependence, demanding that the U.S. exchange dollars held by France for gold. This move posed a serious threat to U.S. economic stability, as the country lacked sufficient gold reserves to cover all dollars in circulation. De Gaulle's actions sent a clear warning, and soon afterward, the U.S. abandoned the gold standard altogether. This decision marked the end of the dollar's gold backing and transformed it into a currency sustained solely by American political and economic influence. Today, most people automatically associate currency with the dollar, but this was not always the case. The dominance of the dollar was achieved through a series of political maneuvers and international agreements, shaping its current status. In 1974, the United States and Saudi Arabia signed a historic oil-dollar agreement. Under this pact, Saudi Arabia committed to selling its oil exclusively for U.S. dollars, while America provided protection and advanced technology in return. This arrangement cemented the dollar's position as the world's primary reserve currency, fueling immense global demand for American money. Consider that maintaining this demand has resulted in over $32 trillion in U.S. debt securities issued by the United States. Essentially, nearly every nation holds its reserves in dollars, and corporations earn revenues in this currency, making them dependent on the U.S. economy. For instance, China and Japan alone hold more than $1 trillion each, and they cannot afford a dollar collapse as it would instantly devalue their own assets. Paradoxically, any move away from the dollar, such as Saudi Arabia's potential shift, heightens the risk of a financial crisis. On one hand, governments are compelled to support the dollar's dominance. On the other, its value increasingly diverges from tangible economic fundamentals. Each act of distancing from the dollar acts like a domino, capable of triggering a global downturn. Every time the United States prints money to cover its expenses, millions worldwide feel the impact. Europe, for example, experienced inflation reaching 10% after the Federal Reserve's massive monetary injections following the de-dollarization crisis. This is only a direct effect. The ripple effects extend further, especially in commodity markets priced in dollars. Even if oil and gas prices fall, global crises or Federal Reserve policies can make energy more expensive for importing nations, as they must buy these resources in dollars. Developing countries feel this acutely. Each dollar fluctuation causes fuel prices to rise, which then drives up costs for food and transportation. Imagine Brazil, heavily reliant on dollar imports. When the U.S. increases dollar circulation, prices in local markets tend to climb. Similarly, in Turkey, where inflation is rampant, the dollar's value dictates the cost of homes, cars, and everyday goods. This interconnectedness means that if the dollar loses its reserve status, the entire global pricing system could destabilize. What would happen to the world economy if the dollar's dominance fades? For example, Saudi Arabia's decision to stop pricing oil exclusively in dollars isn't just a contractual change. It signals a shift that could encourage other nations to adopt their own currencies, reducing reliance on the dollar. Already, countries like China, Russia, and the BRIC nations are moving toward de-dollarization, conducting transactions in their own currencies and leveraging digital platforms. This trend threatens to weaken the dollar's role as the global reserve currency, potentially delivering a significant blow to the American economy. The global financial system, heavily reliant on the United States, may soon face profound upheaval. Currently, over $7 trillion are held in foreign banks outside America, and if the dollar's dominance over oil and other commodities begins to weaken, these vast reserves could pose a serious threat to worldwide stability. Such a collapse would trigger a sharp decline in the value of dollar-denominated assets, risking a global financial crisis. For instance, if Saudi Arabia starts accepting yuan for oil, it could set off a chain reaction, prompting other nations to follow suit. This would lead to a mass withdrawal from dollar assets, potentially igniting panic across international markets. Reflecting on the crisis of 2008, when the U.S. mortgage meltdown caused banks worldwide to falter, the loss of dollar supremacy could be equally, if not more, catastrophic. Moreover, each dollar circulating outside the United States sustains its economy. Roughly 60% of all global reserves are held in dollars. Should countries shift away from the dollar, it would flood the U.S. with returning currency, igniting hyperinflation. In 2020, printing new dollars pushed inflation to 9%, already raising prices for goods and real estate. Now imagine if all those dollars suddenly flooded back into America. Prices could double or triple, reminiscent of Venezuela's hyperinflation, where inflation soared beyond 1,000,000%. While such a scenario won't happen overnight, mass selling of dollars could make everyday American goods, from groceries to gasoline, unaffordable domestically. A similar situation unfolded in Turkey in 2022, when the lira depreciated over 40%, causing import prices to double. If the U.S. faces a comparable devaluation, the consequences could be just as severe. A rupture in the dollar oil contract with Saudi Arabia would threaten not only the U.S., but also the entire financial architecture underpinning the current global order. Should Saudi Arabia and other nations abandon the dollar? Questions arise about which currencies might replace it, and who would benefit most from such a shift. While the US and European Union strive to preserve their financial dominance, emerging powers within the BRICS alliance are developing alternative payment systems like BRICS Pay and digital currencies, aiming to bypass dollar dependence. These initiatives enable countries to circumvent sanctions and diminish America's influence. Notably, Saudi Arabia has shown interest in joining BRICS, further unsettling U.S. interests. A key tool in the push for de-dollarization is digital currency, with China actively leading the development of such systems. Collaborating with Saudi Arabia and others, China is working on a digital currency designed to serve as an alternative to the dollar in international transactions, signaling a significant shift in the global monetary landscape. The project has now reached a stage where the digital currency is minimally viable, signaling its imminent practical use. This development suggests that large-scale transactions, such as oil deliveries, could soon be settled in digital currency, bypassing the dollar entirely. If the world manages to establish a system free from dollar dominance, what would become of our traditional global economy? Russia and China have already transitioned to mutual settlements, with over 90% of their transactions conducted in national currencies, effectively excluding the dollar. This shift significantly diminishes U.S. influence over their economies, as they no longer need to convert assets into dollars constantly. Such a mechanism not only saves billions on currency fluctuations but also fosters financial independence. For instance, prior to 2014, more than 70% of Russia-China trade was dollar-based, but today that figure has fallen below 10%. This trend underscores a growing global movement away from the dollar in strategic partnerships. Since 2022, the combined GDP of the BRICS nations has surpassed that of the G7, highlighting the alliance's expanding economic clout. BRICS is building a comprehensive infrastructure that enables countries to conduct financial transactions without relying on the dollar. The BRICS Pay system exemplifies this, functioning not merely as an alternative to SWIFT, but as a full-fledged network for cross-border transfers and digital currency exchanges. Once fully operational, member states could settle trades in digital currencies, creating an independent financial ecosystem detached from dollar influence. Imagine purchasing a smartphone previously paid for in dollars, with the price fluctuating based on exchange rates. Now, China can sell the same devices for BRICS countries in their local currencies, such as yuan. For nations in Africa or Latin America, this offers tangible benefits by reducing dependence on costly dollar conversions and stabilizing economic relations. Another example is India, which has begun paying for Russian oil in rubles or rupees, lowering its costs on energy imports. If such changes become global, the dollar's role would diminish to that of a mere internal U.S. currency. But who among these emerging players is capable of replacing the dollar? And are they prepared to offer a genuine alternative? Losing the dollar's reserve currency status would impact more than just America. U.S. import prices would rise, leading to higher costs for goods ranging from electronics to raw materials. Oil prices, now set partly outside dollar influence, would become more volatile, and our usual financial strategies might no longer suffice. Comparing economies, the United States is known for its technological innovation and cultural influence, but it primarily exports dollars which underpin global trade. Meanwhile, China, as the world's manufacturing hub, produces vast quantities of electronics and consumer goods. Germany excels in automotive and industrial exports. Russia supplies major energy resources, and India exports software and IT services. If the dollar's dominance wanes, the global economic landscape could shift dramatically, with new currencies and alliances reshaping international trade and finance. The core of America's economic influence hinges on the demand for its currency. If the dollar loses its reserve currency status, the United States would face a significant decline in its global economic power. This shift would directly impact consumers worldwide, including Americans, leading to a tangible rise in prices for many goods. Currently, about 60% of all imported goods consumed in the United States are purchased abroad. Should the dollar weaken, the resulting drop in its value would inevitably cause prices to climb. Imagine the typical American shopping basket, filled with clothing, electronics, and household items where more than half are imported. A decline in the dollar's exchange rate could push the cost of these goods up by 30 to 50%. But this effect wouldn't be confined to the United States alone. Countries that rely on the dollar for international transactions, such as those in Europe, Asia, and Latin America, would also feel the pinch as inflationary pressures spread globally. In the United States, inflation could surge into double digits, as a weakening dollar makes foreign travel and imported medicines nearly unaffordable luxuries. Even short-term drops in the dollar's value have historically triggered noticeable shifts in global markets. For instance, between 2000 and 2020, a mere 5% decline in the dollar's worth caused prices for many goods to jump by 15 to 20%. If the dollar's reserve status diminishes over the long term, the cost of everyday products could skyrocket, making essentials like food, fuel, and electronics prohibitively expensive, especially in developing nations. Consider a European student planning to study in the United States. Rising costs due to a weakening dollar would not only inflate tuition but also make daily expenses significantly more costly. Similarly, countries that buy energy in dollars, such as Mexico, who imports a large portion of its oil, would see fuel prices soar at every gas station. Transitioning to other currencies or paying more dollars would further strain their economies. For ordinary Americans, the implications are equally profound. A diminished dollar's global standing would alter everyday expenses, loans, and even international travel. If the dollar's demand abroad diminishes, international trips and online shopping from foreign sites would become much more expensive. Imagine ordering a new gadget from overseas only to find it costs 30 to 50% more due to currency fluctuations. Airfares, hotel stays, and even routine purchases like groceries and sightseeing would see sharp price increases. Furthermore, if the dollar ceases to be the world's reserve currency, the U.S. government would face higher costs to service its debts, directly affecting American taxpayers. The overall economic landscape would shift dramatically, making both international travel and domestic living more costly, and fundamentally altering the financial stability that the dollar currently provides. Rising interest rates will make borrowing for homes or cars more difficult, as loan costs increase significantly. For many, this shift could effectively block access to such major purchases. On the international stage, the dominance of the dollar as the world's primary currency grants the United States considerable economic leverage, enabling them to impose sanctions and control global financial flows. However, if the dollar were to lose its status, many nations could freely conduct transactions in alternative currencies, reducing America's influence through economic sanctions and financial pressure. As the dollar's global role diminishes, America's economic power would weaken, prompting its allies to turn to other major financial centers like China, Europe, or Russia. Imagine a world where the United States no longer holds a leading position in the global economy. In such a scenario, the U.S. economy would resemble a powerful engine, heavily reliant on a steady influx of liquidity, primarily supplied by the dollar which the country exports worldwide. This process of maintaining economic growth and liquidity hinges on the dollar's unique status as the global reserve currency. Countries and central banks accumulate dollar reserves to facilitate international trade, pay for imports, and purchase vital resources such as oil. This persistent demand for dollars allows the United States to attract capital freely, including investments in government bonds. Ultimately, this demand sustains low interest rates domestically, fostering economic expansion. The dollar's reserve currency status also acts as a safety valve, enabling the U.S. to influence the global economy by injecting additional dollars during crises. This mechanism helps mitigate inflationary shocks within America, as excess dollars circulate globally rather than overheating the domestic market. When other nations like Saudi Arabia or others begin to shift away from holding dollars in favor of alternative currencies, the world will no longer absorb dollar surpluses as before. Such a shift would lead to rising inflation within the United States, making borrowing more expensive and complicating efforts to finance deficits. Without the export of dollars, it would become increasingly difficult for America to sustain its economic needs, and the attractiveness of its markets for investment would decline. Losing the dollar's reserve status would fundamentally alter the global financial landscape, affecting everyone, raising prices for goods and fuel, and increasing costs for mortgages and credit cards. This transformation would reshape the rules of the game, with profound consequences for the global economy and everyday life. What role will other currencies play in the global economy? Will the dollar maintain its dominance in the coming years? These questions are crucial, as their answers will shape the future of the international financial system and influence the economic lives of individuals worldwide. The evolving landscape raises concerns about whether the dollar's supremacy can endure amid rising competition from emerging currencies. As global markets shift, the stability of the dollar remains a key factor for economic stability everywhere. How these developments unfold will determine the financial environment for generations to come.